split over the way out of restrictions as the Prime Minister looks towards living with Delta.
This Groundhog Day has to end, and it will end when we start getting to 70% and 80%.
New South Wales on track to hit its vaccine target early, but the number of new cases refuses to drop. Afghan athletes among the latest to be rescued from Afghanistan's capital, but many more people remain trapped.
And coming up on The Business, CEO versus average Joe. Should companies be forced to reveal how much bosses take home compared to their workers?
Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. The plan to begin reopening Australia once double-dose vaccination rates exceed 70% is unravelling just weeks after it was signed off by National Cabinet. The Premiers of Queensland and Western Australia have rebuffed the Prime Minister's plea to lock in the agreement, arguing the New South Wales outbreak has changed the equation. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
A frustrated Prime Minister still seeking consensus on moving the country forward and out of lockdowns.
This Groundhog Day has to end, and it will end when we start getting to 70% and 80%.
The Prime Minister pleading with Premiers to stick with the plan signed off by National Cabinet to gradually reopen Australia once more than 70% of over 16s are fully vaccinated.
If not at 70% and 80%, then when? Otherwise, we stay in the cave forever.
You can't keep Delta out forever. You can't assume there'll be zero cases, even if you've had zero cases today.
Premiers in low or zero COVID states unconvinced.
Just because the New South Wales government has made a mess of it doesn't mean the rest of us should suffer.
They claim the national plan is out of date because it was based on modelling that didn't factor a COVID outbreak as big as New South Wales.
It was premised on there being around 30 cases in the community, and now we have thousands of cases.
Victoria's Premier says that while statewide lockdowns would be highly unlikely at 80% vaccination, localised lockdowns can't be ruled out.
If I get the advice from the doctors to do it, I'll do it. I won't second guess them, and I won't turn this into a political game.
Barriers to normal life on display in federal parliament. MPs in the chamber given a Perspex perspective.
Does the Prime Minister stand by his announcement that we can move forward with our reopening plan regardless of case numbers?
Those, Mr Speaker, who think that Australians must remain locked down forever, Mr Speaker, they are not in sync with where the Australian people are at.
COVID zero is no longer a realistic prospect in New South Wales, and eliminating the virus might be a stretch in Victoria too. So while some leaders might revel in their state's COVID-free status for now, the reality is that at some point in the months ahead, other premiers will lift restrictions while COVID is active in the community, which is why vaccination is vital wherever you live. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
New South Wales is on the verge of a vaccine milestone. The state is close to 6 million doses, but there are other numbers which continue to worry health authorities. The virus has claimed more lives. 3 people in their 80s have died. Case numbers are only slightly down on yesterday. Residents are now living under even harsher rules and woke to news of a potential super spreader event at a church service in the city's west.
We declare that lockdowns are over in the name of Jesus.
But they aren't. On the eve of a curfew, 60 people were sprung at an unlawful gathering at this Blacktown church. Many here weren't wearing masks.
I've had a few services that we've noticed, and more people than we thought they probably should have had.
30 people were fined. The church was also fined $5,000.
I think all of us feel the disappointment when people just blatantly ignore what's in place.
For the third day in a row, case numbers are above 800. Almost 700 are still under investigation. 3 people in their 80s have died. A man linked to Liverpool's geriatric ward outbreak, a man in Newcastle linked to an aged care home, and a woman at Campbelltown Hospital. It's feared more people could end up in hospital if the Christ Embassy service ends up as a super spreading event. Blacktown's mayor has called the gathering absolutely disgusting. It also fell on a day when Blacktown recorded 100 new infections. Cases remaining high could prolong the toughest of restrictions, including the curfew, which took effect overnight.
Even though the Premier has said for months on end that curfews don't work, that we understand that it's now here, and we're hardworking Australians in this part of the world, and we'll continue to do the right thing, which the majority are doing.
RBT turned stay-at-home checks. Police are making good on their word and patrolling streets in large numbers. But rule breaking in the east is also taking a toll. 20 people who went to a Maroubra party and 16 of their close contacts have now caught COVID. The uneven restrictions are already being felt across Sydney. New data shows businesses in the east and north have it a lot sweeter than their west and southwestern counterparts.
On a weekly basis, I'll have more than 50 orders just during the week, just for like little things. You definitely feel it. I've got zero, absolute zero.
The lockdown in Sydney's west has been much harder, and those additional restrictions are preventing people from going out and shopping in their local areas.
Time to enjoy the finer things can't come soon enough. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
Victorian authorities insist they have their outbreak under control despite another jump in new cases. One leading epidemiologist is continuing his calls for the government to change course if this lockdown doesn't work. Of the 71 new cases, 49 are linked to known clusters, but just 16 had been in isolation during their infectious period. Of particular concern are 22 new mystery cases as the virus spreads into Camberwell, Fitzroy North and further afield to Sorrento on the Mornington Peninsula. The Shepparton cluster has grown to 36 cases. Young children account for 20% of the almost 500 active cases across the state.
Victoria's race to get vaccinated has hit a bump in the road. While hundreds turned out to get jabbed at this old Ford factory, which opened in Broadmeadows, it was revealed around 10,000 people aren't showing up to their appointments each day, double what it was a week ago.
Getting vaccinated today is better than joining the queue in a fortnight.
But as case numbers climb, along with the toll on Victorians, at least one expert has stepped away from his support of the hard and fast lockdown, suggesting it might be time for a rethink by early next month.
Another option is that we could just relax to a soft lockdown, which would look like more industry back at work, but more time outside, abandoning curfews.
But the Premier isn't exactly keen on the idea of a lighter lockdown to bridge the gap until our vaccination rates hit the magic mark.
You start to open up and it won't be bubbling, it'll be raging. We don't have the supply and Delta will move faster than we can vaccinate people.
There were 22 mystery cases in Victoria today, double the day before, showing the virus is spreading into more Melbourne suburbs.
Just because it doesn't lead the news doesn't mean it isn't dangerous for you in your locality.
Health authorities are urging young men in the western suburbs to get tested, particularly in Newport and Altona North.
If you're active in the community, if you're in your 20s and your 30s, if you're connected to the footy club, if you're connected to the gyms, if you're active in the community, please come forward and get tested.
The focus on young people is for good reason. 21 of the 29 people in hospital are under the age of 50, including a baby.
We've also got examples of children, collapsing at school and vomiting at school. That's how ill they are.
As more hospitals become exposure sites, including St Vincent's in Fitzroy, there are more than 450 staff from the Royal Melbourne Hospital in isolation as that cluster grows to at least 10. There are serious concerns about staff shortages.
There's huge pressure on the Royal Melbourne with hundreds of staff being furloughed, staff being told they need to come in even though they're close contacts.
Shepparton's Notre Dame College is the third school to close in that area after a student tested positive. The outbreak there has ballooned to 36.
We want to understand as quickly as we can about how the virus is moving through the community.
While hopes of Victoria's lockdown ending as planned are fading fast, health authorities are adamant they haven't lost control and are still hopeful they can get a ring around this outbreak by the end of next week. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
The ACT has recorded 16 new infections, bringing the total number of active cases in the territory to 137. There are now more than 360 contact sites spread across the city, with thousands of close contacts identified. And while young people are disproportionately represented in the infection figures, they still don't have access to the Pfizer vaccine.
Another day of increasingly familiar statistics, updating case numbers, new exposure sites and the growing number of Canberrans in quarantine.
We have recorded 16 new COVID-19 positive cases. That brings our total active cases associated with this outbreak to 137.
The number of exposure sites has grown to over 360, with 37 new sites added today.
We have over 13,500 self-identified close contacts who we're continuing to support in quarantine, and over 6,100 casual contacts.
The virus is spreading across Canberra, with new exposure sites at the Erindale shops in Tuggeranong and at a childcare centre in Nichols in Canberra's north. At that close exposure site, the Bright Bees Early Learning Centre, a positive case had repeated and prolonged exposure over 4 days. Now, for the first time, Canberrans aged 16 to 29 will be able to register for the Pfizer vaccine. But they're unlikely to even get their first injection until mid-October. The Chief Minister critical of the Commonwealth for the lack of supply, but he says older Canberrans who are eligible should get vaccinated.
It's an obligation I feel very strongly about, that we owe it to the people who haven't had the opportunity to get vaccinated, the young people, the kids, to give them that opportunity, to buy them the time to get vaccinated.
Andrew Barr's call to be more ambitious, to be more kind of dedicated to supporting young people, he's absolutely right. And I think that the other states and territories and the Commonwealth need to lift their game.
Extensive and rapid testing is key to keeping ahead of the Delta variant, but it was limited today, with the Brindabella drive-through site closed because of rain. The government says it will be ramping up testing in coming days. Also today, some essential building work restarted, including at the Canberra Hospital site. But many in the industry want more sites to be reopened under a COVID-safe plan developed with the industry.
If some are able to work safely, why can't I work safely? Our position and our call to the ACT government here is to open up the entire industry, all at the same time, all in a safe manner.
Compliance with the range of rules and regulations in the construction sector isn't always 100%. I think Canberrans know that.
Mr Barr praised the industry for its cooperation, but says the plan needs to be workable and enforceable. As for the way out of the lockdown, whenever it happens, Andrew Barr is clear it will be gradual, with no large public gatherings and continuing restrictions. Gordon Taylor, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, these days there's an app for everything, including monitoring people in isolation. South Australia is taking steps to end the need for returning international travellers to quarantine in hotels. A trial of technology is underway in Adelaide, which will allow them to serve their 2 weeks at home.
Monitoring home quarantine from the palm of a hand. Domestic arrivals among the first of 50 travellers to be watched by a new SA government app. And people who touch down from overseas will be added to the trial within weeks.
Incorporated into this new app is a geolocator as well as facial recognition software.
In time, it's hoped the app will see fewer people in Medi hotels. Only international travellers who are fully vaccinated will be able to access the home quarantine program. The Premier says he's confident the software will become the national standard. As for the data collected,
that information is gathered, it's not stored. It's used for verification processes only. Now, of course, if somebody's not there, well, then we will take action.
When people know that they are being monitored, when they know that they will be caught out, they seem to do the right thing.
The state government app was developed after plans to use the same off-the-shelf product as WA were scrapped. A $1.1 million deal with Perth-based firm GenViz was inked last November and dumped in February.
Well, look, I'm just not familiar with that technology, but what I do know is that we are the national trial in South Australia.
While getting international students back into SA now won't depend on interstate borders being open.
Obviously, we're in a situation now that it's unlikely that that's going to be achieved with New South Wales and Victoria.
The first arrivals are not expected before the end of next month at the earliest. Rory McLaren, ABC News, Adelaide.
New Zealand has extended its countrywide lockdown with the number of COVID-19 infections still rising. 35 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported, with the majority of them in Auckland. It brings the total number of infections in the outbreak to 107. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the outbreak has yet to peak and the government is trying to suppress the virus.
The elimination strategy is the right thing for New Zealand. It means getting those cases back down to a point where we can remove our restrictions again.
Auckland will exit lockdown next Tuesday, while the rest of the country should see restrictions lift on Friday. Around 50 Afghan athletes and their families have been brought out of Kabul by the Defence Force and are on their way to Australia. One of them is Taekwondo athlete Zakir Kudaduda. She is trying to make it to Tokyo in time to become Afghanistan's first female Paralympian. Last week she issued this plea for help as Kabul descended into chaos.
I request from you all that I'm an Afghan woman, and as a representative of Afghan women, I ask you to help me.
British and French troops helped the athletes through the airport so they could link up with the ADF in time. The Australian government has agreed to grant humanitarian visas to all the athletes, most of whom are women. Crowds outside the airport are growing, with people risking everything to escape Taliban rule. The United States is considering extending the evacuation mission into next month, but it's not clear if the Taliban will agree. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner reports.
There's nothing these people can do but wait. Thousands are desperate to leave Afghanistan, hoping to escape this misery. And they're the ones who've been able to get inside Kabul airport, which is heavily guarded by the US and British militaries. Even here, they're sleeping rough and enduring the heat with little food and water. It's better than being on the other side of these walls.
Outside is Taliban is kicking the people with a rifle, with everything.
British paratroopers are having to work alongside the Taliban to control the crowds.
At the moment, that involves an element of the Taliban being here.
Inside on the tarmac, the evacuation is calm and organised. Nearly 30,000 people have gotten out in the past week. Families who've been struggling to get on planes are relieved, but also devastated to be leaving their country behind. More than 470 people were taken out of Kabul on the latest Australian rescue flights.
I know the desperation and fear that is all pervasive right now. I know it is difficult beyond our imaginings for so many.
But many are still trapped. One woman, whose Australian husband told the ABC he's made 4 attempts to reach the airport, now says she's worried he's giving up.
I have to keep pushing him, telling him, you've got kids. You have to do this for your 3 kids. I'm asking Australia to help me, please.
The US is accelerating efforts to get people out and will use 18 commercial planes to transfer evacuees.
We're working hard and as fast as we can to get people out, but we have a long way to go, and a lot could still go wrong.
The Australian government says it will support the operation as long as needed, as the US considers extending its deadline to withdraw all its troops by the end of the month. But the families of Australians still trapped under Taliban control say they need more help from the government to help get them to the airport.
The struggle at the airport doesn't stop at night. Children, parents and grandchildren are exhausted by a process that may not even let them leave. Tom Joyner, ABC News, Dubai.
The federal government has backtracked on providing additional support to struggling childcare operators, just days after saying the sector has had unparalleled support. The measures will apply immediately in New South Wales and Victoria, and 4 weeks into any future lockdown. Childcare centres will be paid 25% of pre-pandemic revenue, rising to 40% for care outside of school hours.
This will be a significant financial package, which will be good for hundreds of thousands of parents, good for those businesses, and very important also for the workers.
To access the payment, centres will need to retain staff and waive parents' fees. The murder trial of Northern Territory Police Officer Zachary Rolfe over the shooting death of an Aboriginal teenager has been delayed for a third time after a last-minute ruling from the High Court. The rare intervention now means the trial may not go ahead until next year.
Less than an hour before a jury was set to be selected, it was over before it began.
The High Court decided to stay the matter until the special leave is heard.
Constable Rolfe is charged with murder after the shooting death of Aboriginal man Kumanjai Walker in the remote community of Yuendamu nearly 2 years ago. He's pleaded not guilty to the charge and was set to face a jury today before High Court Justice Jacqueline Gleeson ordered the proceedings be paused. The trial of a member of the police force whose functions included the protection of life in connection with the death of the deceased is a matter of the gravest community concern, she said. The stay will allow prosecutors a chance to fight for an appeal in the High Court, where they hope to have a decision of the Territory's full bench overturned. The decision allowed Constable Rolfe to argue before a jury that he should not be held criminally liable for Kumanjai Walker's death if he was acting in good faith as a police officer at the time of the alleged shooting. The High Court's ruling today means the trial could be delayed for months, with possible new dates flagged in November or December this year or April next.
They did so because it's a matter of public importance and because they thought that the special leave application had some reasonable prospects.
Are we expecting to see a trial before the end of this year?
Look, we hope so.
The application for special leave will be heard in the High Court in September. Melissa McKay, ABC News.
Police in Victoria are appealing for the public's help after the abduction of 2 young children from their home in Melbourne's east. The pair's mother was also assaulted, and investigators don't yet know if the attack was random or targeted.
Dressed in their pyjamas, 5-year-old Adila and 3-year-old Bilal Wally were abducted from their Blackburn North home this morning. Their 32-year-old mother was assaulted and left bound and gagged.
She was able to get free and notify people that were passing by.
Police say a man armed with a weapon broke into the family's home around 8:30. He's accused of stealing their black 2014 Mercedes-Benz sedan and kidnapping the 2 children.
The mother at this stage has been unable to say to us that yes, she does recognise him as a particular individual, but we're continuing to work with Mum on that.
Their father, a 34-year-old man, was at work at the time. The kidnapper is described as having dark skin and was wearing a black hooded jumper and a surgical face mask.
It's not too late, and I implore you, please, to let those children go so that they can be returned to their parents where they should be.
Investigators are appealing for anyone who saw the vehicle with licence plates BEQ 882 to contact police.
Please come forward. Don't hold back, because you may just have that piece of the jigsaw that we need to be able to put this together.
Annie Kearney, ABC News, Melbourne.
Tourism operators and conservationists have slammed the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service for watering down public messages over a bushfire on Fraser Island last year. Internal emails obtained by the ABC reveal a senior parks bureaucrat was worried the strong words would scare off Christmas bookings. Rachel Rieger has the story.
Images of the out-of-control bushfire as it tore through Fraser Island made international headlines. The blaze was sparked by an illegal campfire last October and for over 2 months went on to burn more than half the World Heritage listed site.
The level of trauma that we'd actually all been through It was really, a very, very traumatic experience.
The ABC has revealed that 6 weeks into the blaze, a top bureaucrat in the Parks and Wildlife Service played down the severity of the fire in a draft media release aimed at warning visitors their travel plans may be disrupted at short notice. He said the warning was unnecessarily alarmist. The areas mentioned are inconsequential places, and the message will scare people off from making Christmas bookings to the resorts.
And it concerns me that we had bureaucrats squabbling over messaging and the images of those respective departments as opposed to focusing on putting out that bushfire.
Tourism operators who live on Gari say they felt left in the dark and the lack of information hurt businesses.
What Parks created was so much uncertainty that we had cancellations right through until March the following year because people were just so uncertain of what was happening on the island.
The Queensland Conservation Council says the protection of World Heritage sites should be the top priority.
There seems to be too little regard in these types of management situations for the natural and cultural values. It seems to be all about public relations.
We know the Premier's got 30-odd spin doctors sitting in her office, and it concerns me that we've now got a government more worried about public image than action at the front.
When questioned over the emails this morning, the Premier said she wasn't aware of the furor.
No, I'll have a look at it when I get back to work. I've been very busy.
In a statement this afternoon, a spokesman for the Premier says today she sought and been assured department media will work closely with Parks and Incident Control for any future bushfires. Rachel Rieger, ABC News, Brisbane.
Time for a look at what's coming up on the business. Here's host Catherine Robinson.
Tonight, CEO versus average Joe. Should companies be forced to reveal how much bosses take home compared to their workers? And the Tasman gamble. Will the $2 billion bid for Z Energy pay off for Ampol? All this and more at 8:45 Eastern.
For many people, spending time in nature has been a welcome antidote to the stresses of lockdowns. But in city centres, parks and open spaces can be in high demand. Now, Sydney researchers are looking to rooftops to create more places where nature can thrive.
There's lots and lots of honeybees, which is great.
9 stories above the street nestles a secret garden. There are beetles, birds and native bees.
Very quickly, the insect life, the wildlife up on here was amazing.
Sustainability expert Lucy Sharman was the driving force behind this experiment. It involved 2 identical buildings side by side, one fitted with ordinary solar panels, the other with panels that sit in a bed of plants.
It was one of the key research questions. Do green roofs actually make solar panels more efficient? And yes, they do.
Solar panels actually don't work as well if they get too hot. The plants stopped them overheating and kept the building itself cooler. On hot days, the temperature on the green roof was up to 20 degrees lower. At the same time, the plants were soaking up almost 9 tonnes of greenhouse gases and reducing stormwater runoff.
Plants do offer a huge amount in terms of making cities more resilient to climate change.
Researchers from UTS say one of the biggest surprises was the increase in biodiversity.
To attract any animals that high up in the middle of the CBD is quite astounding.
Motion sensor cameras captured a wide array of visitors.
We even have evidence that there could have been predatory birds.
Green spaces in the city have been highly sought after during the lockdown. Researchers say green rooftops like this one could provide that connection to nature that so many of us have craved.
If you think about where are the places and spaces in your life that you feel the happiest, they're inevitably in nature. We are so intrinsically connected to plants and wildlife.
Connections that become even more important as we spend more time closer to home. Ursula Malone, ABC News, Sydney.
Here are the top stories on ABC News. Tensions are mounting between the Commonwealth and some states and territories. The Prime Minister wants all jurisdictions to hold to the agreement to wind back restrictions as more people are vaccinated. Some premiers have expressed hesitancy to move away from tough restrictions. Coronavirus numbers in New South Wales remain high. There are 818 new cases and 3 deaths. At least 57 people had been in the community during their infectious period. Despite the record number of new infections, Premier Gladys Berejiklian has foreshadowed the easing of some restrictions as the state approaches 6 million vaccine doses. Australia has voiced support for an extension of the international evacuation mission in Afghanistan. The US President Joe Biden had set an August 31 deadline, but is now considering pushing that date out, given how many people are unable to reach the airport in Kabul. Australia has so far evacuated more than 800 people. And Adelaide and Perth have made compelling pitches to host the AFL Grand Final. The league says a lack of West Australian sides in the finals and Port Adelaide's second-place finish will have no bearing on where the premiership decider is played. The MCG is unlikely to host the Grand Final because of Melbourne's outbreak. The vaccination rate in New South Wales is faster than had been predicted, and could see some residents closer to freedom sooner, despite the stubbornly high number of infections. The state's Premier Gladys Berejiklian has told 7:30 aiming for COVID zero in the community is now unrealistic.
What we're attempting to do is make sure that those most vulnerable are vaccinated, those obviously who are more susceptible to COVID are vaccinated, so it reduces the likelihood of people getting into hospital and dying. And we know, Lee, again, no death is acceptable, no death is easy, but we know that outside of COVID, we lose 600 to 800 people a year in New South Wales because of the flu. Our job is to give information to the community and prevent the loss of life as much as possible.
Premier, sorry to interrupt, but I just want things to be as clear as possible for people at home, because they're quite stretched, right? And they just want to know what life might look like going ahead. So if we look at the examples overseas, if you take Canada, for example, it has about 2,200 cases and about 9 deaths every day. Its population is about 10 million bigger than Australia. So is that the kind of ballpark figure that Australians should be looking at? If we open up without lockdowns at about 70 or 80% vaccination, are we looking at something under 10 deaths a day?
Well, look, we know now that the rate of hospitalisation in New South Wales from all the cases is around 5.5%. So, but that again will change depending on how many people we get vaccinated. And we do have to accept, unfortunately, that people will succumb. But I wish I had every single scenario in which people will succumb. And we've seen also that randomly, because of the Delta strain, some people who are of a different demographic, a different age group from those most vulnerable are also succumbing. And that's why vaccination rates are so important.
But Premier, sorry to interrupt, but I just want things to be as clear for the public as possible, because as you know, people are pretty stretched, right? And they just want to know what life ahead might look like. So if we look at the examples overseas, you look at Canada, it has about 2,200 cases a day and 9 deaths. Its population's about 10 million bigger than Australia. Is that the kind of ballpark figure Australia should be thinking we're going to be seeing if we open at this 70-80% lockdown, somewhere around 10 deaths a day?
Well, look, it really depends on what the case numbers are doing at that stage as well, Lee. I'd love to be able to give you a definite ballpark, but that will depend on where the cases are up to. It will depend on which proportion of which demographics are vaccinated. Clearly, we'd love everybody over the age of 70 to be already vaccinated, because we know it impacts in particular those older Australians. We want to make sure that those in vulnerable Indigenous communities are completely vaccinated.
We've heard other state premiers, notably Dan Andrews and Mark McGowan, say that there's no living with COVID and that zero COVID is still viable. Why do you disagree?
Because it's completely unrealistic. I don't know any state or nation on the planet who abides by those rules. It's just not possible. We can't pretend we're extra special or very different from other places. And having said that, Lee, whilst I know the numbers in New South Wales are greater than we've seen before in Australia, to have a reproductive rate or the rate at 1.3 is doing reasonably well, given in most countries it's around 7 to 9. So we are seeing us able to maintain the virus to an extent whilst we get those vaccination rates up. But to suggest that living with Delta means 0 cases is completely unrealistic.
What it all boils down to, what people want to know is, when are we going to be out of this situation? On the current pace of vaccination, when do you think the first easing of restrictions will occur in New South Wales?
Well, I'd always promised our citizens that during September there'd be one extra thing they can do so long as we hit the 6 million jabs by the end of August. So there'll be at least one extra thing our citizens can do next month in September.
And what's that likely to be? What kind of a thing?
Well, our health experts are working on that. So we've consulted the chief psychiatrist, as well as those that support our economy. Obviously, public health and safety comes first, and mental wellbeing. So we will have that advice to the community as soon as we can. But in relation to when we can live life more freely, well, if you follow the Doherty plan, it says 70% double dose vaccination. New South Wales looks to be hitting that target by the end of October. I hope we'll get there faster, but it looks like it'll be the end of October. And in relation to 80% double dose vaccination, if we keep the current rates up, New South Wales will get to that target in the middle of November.
Premier, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Lee.
It's Gladys Berejiklian speaking to Lee Sales. Farmers will soon have access to a new workforce, with the federal government confirming a new agriculture visa which will allow foreigners to take up jobs in a range of sectors. But as rural reporter Kath Sullivan found, there's still plenty to be done before workers can touch down.
It takes many hands when making meat.
It's basically almost one person per animal, maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes to get that piece of meat basically on your plate.
The second biggest beef company in the country has had to reduce the amount of meat it's processing, not due to a shortage of cattle, but a shortage of workers.
Which is sort of an interesting position to be in during drought recovery. It's a bit of a first, actually.
Farmers too are desperate for more workers.
We just don't have enough Aussies, and we don't have enough people to actually fill the jobs that are available on farms.
Today, that call was answered. Details emerging of an agriculture visa, first promised in 2018 and finally committed to on the sidelines of a UK trade deal earlier this year.
We needed this flexibility, and so today it's quite exciting.
Visa regulations will start to fall into place from next month, covering skilled and unskilled jobs in farming, meat processing, fisheries and forestry. But it's not yet clear which countries will sign up to the program or how many workers it will provide.
There's still some details to come out to be 100% certain whether it's going to make a difference for our grain growers.
The minister denies its policy on the run.
This has been consulted to death. The reality is we're acting swiftly.
And hopes the first workers could arrive in Australia before Christmas.
We're cautious not to put an exact date in which we'll see the first workers.
It's kind of the elephant in the room is, what are the states going to do? Are they going to let these people in?
The government's considering making the agriculture visa a pathway to permanent residency. That means much needed workers may not only be lured to the regions, they could stay for good. Kath Sullivan, ABC News, Canberra.
Unreasonable, unjust and contrary to the law. A report has blasted the Coober Pedy Council in remote South Australia for the way it provided essential services to its Aboriginal citizens. Some were disconnected from their electricity after accumulating huge debts they had little hope of paying back.
It's one of the hottest places on the planet, but in the blistering heat at Coober Pedy, some of its most disadvantaged community members were forced to go without power for days.
This was in the heat of summer and when this first occurred, and a lot of the people are looking after small children.
The state's ombudsman found the town's previous council, one of the few in Australia running the electricity and water supply, began to cut off power to people who hadn't paid their bills. Because it hadn't offered them repayment plans, among other failings, the ombudsman believes its conduct was unlawful. The plight of dozens of locals are recounted in the report, including one Yankunytjatjara man who wasn't offered an interpreter when discussing a $12,000 debt. When his electricity has been disconnected in the past, he's been unable to keep food in the house, so instead he goes out bush. To keep warm, he has made a campfire in the backyard. He felt bullied and pressured into signing documents where he did not have time to read and understand them.
There was one person who was told that they shouldn't be allowed to live in the house because if they couldn't pay their bills, they shouldn't be living in a house.
The Ombudsman found many Aboriginal locals also felt pressured to dip into native title payments to cover their debts.
It brings great shame on them to again turn to native title funds, which are ordinarily used for projects like community wellbeing, for education and scholarships, for training and employment.
The former Cooper Pedy Council was no stranger to controversy. It was suspended for maladministration in 2019, leaving behind $10 million in debt. The new administrators have accepted the report's recommendations, including to build better ties with its Aboriginal residents.
What's our plan to engage with people? Who are the people we need to talk to? You know, what sort of information do they want, rather than us thinking what information we think they need.
The state government says it's trying to address the council's problems. Gabriella Marchant, ABC News.
Tasmania is preparing for its first taste of AFL finals action, with both elimination matches to be held in Launceston. The location of the grand final is yet to be decided, but the AFL has confirmed there will be a bye week after the preliminary finals.
The stadium's ready, the grass is cut. AFL finals footy is heading to Tasmania.
That's a thrill itself for Tassie. And then to have two games, just amazing.
We are very hopeful and very happy because it will be good for all the businesses around here.
Sydney will take on GWS and the Western Bulldogs will play Essendon, both in Launceston. The winners of those matches might stay on in Tasmania, with the Apple Isle also a chance to host games in the second week of the finals.
We right now just need options, and Tasmania is a great option for us.
The makeup of the rest of the finals remains up in the air, but the AFL maintains the grand final will be held on the 25th of September.
You need to set a date for the grand final, and a lot of things get built around that date, whether it be from a football point of view or from an entertainment perspective or ticket sales and a whole range of things.
With the pre-finals bye already scrapped, there'll need to be a week off during the finals.
If nothing else changes, then you have that week off between the prelim and the grand final.
It's highly unlikely the MCG will host the grand final, with Perth and Adelaide the main options. There are no West Australian teams in the finals, and Port Adelaide finished second on the ladder, but the AFL says that's not a factor.
The priority is firstly to work out whether we can have a grand final at the MCG, second where we can have it from there, and it'll play out as it plays out.
Perth is firming as the likely location, but there's plenty of time for the boundaries to shift again. Peter Lusted, ABC News.
The Canberra Raiders have sacked troubled centre Curtis Scott less than halfway through his 4-year deal. The Raiders board says Scott's prior behaviour and recent assault charge has brought the club into disrepute. Curtis Scott has been charged with assault occasioning bodily harm over his involvement in a fight at a nightclub on May the 30th. The board says the club would continue to support his ongoing rehabilitation and it will be in contact with NRL welfare. Ash Barty has become the first Australian woman to win the Cincinnati singles title since Yvonne Goolagong in 1973. The Wimbledon champion took only 72 minutes to defeat Swiss wildcard Jill Teichmann 6-3, 6-1. It's the 5th tournament Barty has won this year.
It's another title for Ash Barty. Unbeatable, unbelievable form.
It's been an incredible week. Probably a week that I didn't expect from myself. Off the preparation that we'd come off kind of post-Wimbledon and after Tokyo, we took some time off just to not hit too many tennis balls and try and refresh.
Barty's next challenge will be trying to win the US Open for the first time when the tournament begins next week. Time for a check of the weather now. Here's Graham Creed.
For much of the country, a high-pressure system is the dominant feature. Underneath it, we've got generally clear, dry and sunny conditions. Quite a bit of frost about as well underneath it. But we've also got a southerly wind flow into the southeast, and that is bringing some showers and some cold air, snow down to quite low levels in Tasmania and Victoria. But a major feature is a developing east coast low, bringing heavy rainfall, snow, some hail, and also damaging wind into New South Wales. And a front that's associated with that east coast low will bring some fairly widespread showers and possible thunderstorms into the southeast of Queensland. Very gusty winds and below average temperatures across many areas of the south and west. As that low forms off the New South Wales coast, it's the Central Coast, the Sydney area and the Illawarra are likely to record the heaviest of the falls and the strongest of the winds. We've still got some showers on and south of the ranges in Victoria, quite cool and fresh winds as well. And a similar scenario for Tasmania as a frontal system approaches and moves through. Some showers about the west and south, and then they'll creep into the southeast as we move into the evening. For South Australia, still the potential of some showers around through the agricultural areas. A little bit more likely though along the Mount Lofty ranges and also the southeast coast. For Western Australia, a generally dry forecast. There's the possibility of a brief shower or two about parts of the southeast coast. We've got some unsettled conditions anywhere along the top end coast in the Northern Territory. Also the Gregory district looking at dangerous fire weather conditions.
Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. That's ABC News for now. Thanks for your company. I'm Karina Carvalho. Stay with us for the business.